Let's balance the books. Hello, welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and this is Balancing the Books, a game I play every month where I add up all the books that came onto my TBR and all the books that went off my TBR, and I try and keep those numbers balanced. At the beginning of October I started with 44 books on my TBR, so I'm going to take you through everything that happened since then. This video is also very kindly sponsored by Ana Luisa, and so throughout the video I'm going to be showing you some of my beautiful new jewellery that they have sent me this month. I'll start with an easy one because it doesn't actually do anything to my score. The very first book that I read in October was a reread of Luckiest Alive by Knoll. And so because this one was already on my shelf here, not on my TBR, it doesn't actually do anything to the scales, but I wanted to reread it because the movie was coming out and I wanted to reread it before I watched the movie. But you know what's funny? I still haven't watched the movie. Luckiest Girl Alive by Knoll is a thriller that I read when it first came out about 7 years ago, and I had absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I could not put this book down. And so I was very interested to read it 7 years later and discover that I found it really hard to read. Something has happened to me in the last 7 years which has made me weaker. The book is about a woman called Heiny, who we know right from the beginning has a dark side. The very first scene, she is shopping for wedding gifts with her fiancé and she imagines stabbing him with one of the knives that they're looking at. So right from the beginning you're like, she has a sinister undercurrent, and we discover that she is trying to reinvent herself after having a truly terrible series of traumatic events that had happened to her while she was growing up. After a really terrible sexual assault, which is a really hard scene to read, she starts getting bullied, slut-shamed, and her life falls apart from there, building up to this thing that had happened at the end of that year, which I won't spoil for you, but we know in the present day that there is a documentary crew who want to interview her about this thing that happened, and her fiancé really is reluctant about her bringing all of that up again. I found the book so hard to read, partly because that's never a pleasant type of scene to read, but partly because Knoll accurately presents the type of bullying that Heiny would have faced in the aftermath of this, the type of bullying that one of her gay classmates would have faced, and that is how teenagers talked in the years that she's presenting. That doesn't make it any less jarring to read now, and I found I was wincing at a lot of the language that was being used over and over again on the pages. The main character is also clearly suffering from an eating disorder, and again this is an accurate portrayal of the pressure that women like her working in magazines are placed under. However, I didn't find that pleasant to read about. And so I have complicated feelings about this book. I did not enjoy my reading experience this time round. I don't necessarily think that means that the author shouldn't have written those things. She was creating a world, she was building a picture, and I don't think there's anything wrong with her doing that. But the truth is, it made me not enjoy reading the book because it was just constant fat shaming, slut shaming, homophobia, bullying over and over and over again. And I found myself getting really upset reading it in a way that I don't remember getting 7 years ago. And I still haven't seen the film. But I have heard a kind of similar critique, which is that it apparently gratuitously shows a lot of what happens in a way that made my friends who've watched it very uncomfortable. I felt like they didn't need, in order to understand the plot and the characters, they didn't need to have seen that much graphic detail of what happens. Now, before I move on, let me show you the first of my new Ana Luisa pieces. I am an Ana Luisa VIP partner. I've been working with them for a couple of years now, and my jewellery collection has become completely Ana Luisa. I am wearing several pieces of their jewellery at any moment of any day. I'm obsessed with them. They're really beautiful, really well-crafted, good quality pieces of jewellery designed to last, and all of mine have lasted. They're constantly coming out with new designs, so keep checking that website. Every month I look and find brand new gorgeous designs that I just have to add to my collection, including the ones I'm going to show you today. But when you do that, make sure to use my link in my description box, because my link has a magical discount automatically applied to it. You will automatically get the best available offer. If there is a campaign running site-wide, you will automatically get the best deals there, and if there isn't, you will get a special discount that only comes from going through my link. So do make sure that if you go and browse Annalisa, you click on my link to do so. And this is the perfect time to do it. Get those Christmas presents bought early. So let's start with, I think this might be my favourite thing I've ever owned. I have got a snake ring. This is a gorgeous gold wraparound ring with emerald green eyes. It looks so evil, it makes me feel powerful. This looks like something that Taylor Swift would have worn in her Reputation era, and that's really the energy I'm trying to harness at any point. This ring says to me, I'm on my vigilante shit again. What's cool though is while this ring might make me feel evil, Anna and Louisa are not an evil company. In fact, they are totally committed to sustainability. That is why they offset 100% of their carbon emissions. It's why they make really good quality jewelry that will last with you throughout your life. It is why they price their jewelry fairly. They are a company I'm really proud to work with. So for example, this ring, the Clio ring, this cost £58 full price, but of course if you use my link in the description box, you will get that at a reduced price. The next thing I did in October was I went book shopping. I had a £50 Waterstones token to use, so I went and got myself this haul of 4 new books. So this is where we introduce the scale. I have to add 4 books to my TBR. The first of those books was The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine, which is a book I have been anticipating for a long, long time. I first heard about this one a few years ago and I've been really excited for it to come out, and now I've got it. This is a dystopian which reminded me when I first heard about it, the same kind of thing as The Farm by, who's The Farm by? Joanne Ramos. The Farm by Joanne Ramos, which was a really, really amazing dystopian book about surrogates. This one is about mothers who are deemed by the state to not be good enough mothers for any minor infraction, and they are forcibly sent to this school for good mothers. I love feminist dystopia like this that exposes just the existing challenges in our world. It doesn't seem a million miles away from the truth. It's all about the pressures, the perfectionism placed on mothers specifically. And in this book, I think it's also going to dive into the different layers of privilege. So the different challenges involved in being a white woman who becomes a mother versus being a woman of colour who becomes a mother, and how you are seen differently. So I think this book is going to be fascinating. The Skeleton Key by Erin was a book I had not even heard of before I walked into the shop. I always like buying a book from a bookshop that I'd never heard of before. It sounds very simple, but I spend so much time, as I'm sure all of you do too, we're in this kind of online bookish space. I spend so much time hearing about upcoming books, keeping long lists of all the books that I'm supposed to be reading and I'm supposed to be keeping track of, and actually I love the joy of just walking into a bookshop, seeing a book, being drawn to the cover, being drawn to the description, and buying it on the spot, which is what I did. The cover was absolutely beautiful, and when I read the description, it's a book about a book. And I love a book about a book. So there is this fictional book called The Golden Bones, which was published 50 years ago as a fairy tale and treasure map, and people became obsessed with it. And it's about the family of the author of this book who is still alive, and he wants one final publicity burst to bring this final puzzle piece in, and the family are opposed to it because of what they're worried the scrutiny will do to their family. It's so intriguing, I can't even fully make sense of that as a premise for a novel, so I'm really excited to see what any of that means. I bought Adele by Leila Slimani, which is a book I have had my eye on for a while because I really, really liked her last book, Lullaby. Sadly, I did not love this book. I didn't dislike it. I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed it. I think that Leila Slimani is a really good writer, but this book just didn't quite have the hold on me that Lullaby did. I talked about this book already in a video I did on reading the least popular books on my TBR, because this was a book that has very low reviews. And I think the low reviews are harsh. Lullaby also has low reviews, and I really liked Lullaby. This one was actually her first book, but the second one to be translated into English, and yeah, it's not as good. But that shows a good progression. If she wrote Lullaby second and it was better, whatever she writes third is going to be incredible. Maybe she already has and it hasn't been translated into English yet, I don't know. And I bought Sunset by Jessie Cave, which again I've had my eye on for a while because this is a book about sisters and I love books about sisters. I read this one on my trip to Valencia this month, and again, it was fine. I wanted to love it more than I did. It's actually a book about grief. Our main character loses her sister in a terrible accident, and it's about her dealing with the grief of her sister having died, and that was a really hard thing to read about as someone who has a sister and loves my sister to bits. But also, their particular sister relationship was so different from my relationship with my sister that I actually didn't find it particularly relatable in that sense. Me and my sister have a lot of fun together. These two sisters just seem to fight all the time. And when they were getting along, it's because they were just talking about like how many calories there were in Mars bars, and that's not what I enjoy talking to my sister about. I like Jessie Cave. I think she's funny. I've really enjoyed her little cartoons before. I think they're really cute. I follow her on Instagram and I like her strange, quirky little videos, but I'm not sure that I love her as a writer. That's not to say I didn't like the book. I enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars. I kept turning the pages. I wanted to know what was going to happen next to this character. I liked it fine. I didn't fall in love with it at any stage. And then as an extension of my book haul, while I was in the book hauling mood, I had been hoping with my Waterstones voucher to buy the new Gillian McAllister book, Wrong Place, Wrong Time. They didn't have it in Waterstones when I went in, so I then bought it on Kindle because it was then on a deal. It was perfect timing, so I got it for 99p. And I read it, so that one's come straight off. I really enjoyed this. So I have read all of Gillian McAllister's books to date. I was actually sent her first ever book as a proof, and I have managed to get my hands on proofs of every book since then. It's been really, really lucky. And this one I just didn't. I couldn't get my hands on this one as a proof, which was such a shame because this one like seemed the most perfect for me. All of Gillian McAllister's books are thrillers. They're all mysteries. They have previously been mostly from a kind of legal perspective because that is Gillian McAllister's background. This one was totally different. This was a time travel thriller. Could anything be more perfect for me? A Gillian McAllister time travel book. I was so upset that no one wanted to give me a proof. It's fine. Bought it myself. The time travel in this book works in a really fun, interesting way. So it starts on Halloween when our main character is carving a pumpkin late at night, and she looks out the window as her teenage son is getting home late, and she watches as he stabs a person to death outside the window. And she rushes out and the police arrive. They're taken to the police station. She finally falls asleep at the end of this like terrible night. And when she wakes up, it is the day before, and her husband and son have no idea what she's talking about when she is frantic about him having killed someone. From that point, every time she wakes up, it is a day earlier or several days earlier. She goes further and further back in time trying to solve what happened, what led them to this place where her son, her seemingly gentle, loving son, would kill somebody. And I wasn't expecting those big time jumps back. I'd heard the premise and I thought it was going to be going one day at a time back. And I thought the whole thing would be like a week maybe. I was thinking the 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, that you get 7 days to solve the mystery. But no, she just kept going back and back and back, and I loved that as a surprise. There were twists and turns in this book. There were genuinely moments where my jaw dropped because I was not expecting what was going to happen, and the reveals were done so perfectly. I'm not sure where to slot it into my rankings of all of my Gillian McAllister books so far. It's not my number 1. I think that my number 1 is How to Disappear, which is about someone going into witness protection. That one was absolutely incredible. I think that my number 2 is Anything You Do Say, which is a kind of sliding doors book where you follow a character on 2 different paths depending on a choice that they made. This one will probably come in at number 3 under that. It's hard. This is not a Gillian McAllister ranking video. I don't need to do that. It wasn't my number 1 favourite, but it was really, really good. It was really page-turning and fun, and just something a bit different. Okay, let me show you some more jewellery. I got not 1, but 2 ear cuffs from Ana Luisa this month, but they came as a cute little set. This is the Joan set, so 2 little ear cuffs, 1 gold, 1 silver, that are stackable. They're a little bit different from any of the other ear cuffs that I've got in the past. In the past, I've always gone for quite dainty, delicate ones, so I really liked this as something a bit different, a bit edgier. You can buy the Joan set for £37 full price, but if you use my link to buy it, you will get it for a cheaper price. This is a full Ana Luisa ear, by the way. Everything in this ear from Ana Luisa. And it all looks so good together. Next, I read Early Morning Riser by Katherine Heiny, which is a book from my TBR that Raph had recommended. She just read it this year and loved it, so she told me to read it, and it instantly shot up to become, I think, my number 1 read of the year. Is that wild? It might be. This book was absolutely delightful. It's about a woman called Jane who moves to a small town, and she falls in with this eccentric community who live there, and the book spans 17 years of her life. There's a whole cast of really great characters. So Jane is our main character. She's a teacher who moves to this town. She instantly falls in love with Duncan, who is charming and wonderful, but has slept with every woman in the whole area. He's a furniture maker who never finishes any of his projects on time. Everyone warns her not really to trust him, but they do all love him. He's a really good guy. In fact, his ex-wife still lives in the town, and Duncan goes over and mows her lawn for her, and any other odd jobs like that she might need, because her new husband isn't very good at that stuff. Her new husband is one of the most ridiculous characters in fiction, with a list of things that he does not like, longer than the phone book. Jane has a mother who lives not in this small town but comes to stay a lot, and she is truly awful in the most hilarious way. The things that come out of that woman's mouth, pure comedy gold. Jane also has a best friend called Frida, who is the local music teacher, is completely mad, insists on playing the organ at her own wedding. One of the most important characters is a man called Jimmy who works at Duncan's shop. He has some developmental delays, some learning difficulties, and an event that happens earlier in the book entwines their lives together, and Jane feels quite responsible for him throughout the rest of the book, and their evolving relationship is a really important part of the book. The whole book is just beautiful. It's really funny, it's nuts. These characters are subtle caricatures of real people, and so the whole thing, I felt like I was just wryly smiling the whole way through. There are some really heart-wrenching bits as well. There are some really sad things that happen, some really moving sections of this book. Overall, it was a book that I felt was life-enhancing, if that's not too strong a word to use, but I feel like it fits. In fact, I loved that book so much that I read it on the train up to Newcastle, and I finished it just before I arrived, and the second I got off the train at Newcastle, I went to Waterstones and I bought Standard Deviation, which is the first book by the same author. Now I've got a nice little set. I haven't yet read Standard Deviation, but if it is anything, if it is half as good as Early Morning Riser, I will love it. Raph actually had read this one first, and she did say that she liked Early Morning Riser better, but that she had only bought Early Morning Riser because of how much she likes this one. So I think I'm going to love it. It sounds similar. It sounds like, once again, it's going to be about these complicated relationships between hilarious and wonderful characters. I read a book on my Kindle, which I had for a while from NetGalley, and that is I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. This book is about a woman who is a podcaster. She has this kind of true crime-esque podcast, and she goes back to her old high school to teach a semester there, to teach a course in podcasting. All those years earlier, when she had been at that school, one of her classmates had been murdered, and a member of staff had been convicted of the crime and is now in prison to this day. In present day, one of the students in our main character's class wants to create a true crime podcast about this crime because she thinks that the wrong man is in prison. And as someone who absolutely loved Serial, who loved Making a Murderer, this is right up my alley. The book, as a concept, could not be more different from the last Rebecca Makkai book that I read, which was The Great Believers, which was this beautiful, sweeping story about the AIDS crisis. This was totally different. This was a true crime podcast story. It was not what I expected Rebecca Makkai to do next, and I loved this, what she did next. And I really, really enjoyed this book. I did think it was too long. So the book has two parts, and the first part was just too slow. It was good, and I was enjoying it. So this was them kind of reopening this case, looking at the podcast, and we just get too many slow reveals of these clues. So while I was enjoying it, I was starting to lose momentum, but then part two happened. And in part two, we get a time jump, and this was the part of the book that is just the best payoff for anyone who loved those kinds of podcasts and documentaries, like Serial and Making a Murderer. This is what happens next. What happens after a podcast does manage to reopen a case. Overall, I gave that book 4 stars. It was not quite as incredible as something like The Great Believers, but it was a really, really enjoyable read. And she had some really clever techniques in it. So particularly there's this use of repetition and bringing in real stories, possibly made up stories. Some of them were definitely real. So if our main character, if our narrator is, for example, overhearing some of her colleagues talking about a case in the news, she'll say, I'm going to read a section, otherwise I won't be able to convey it properly. she'll say, oh, they were talking about that story. Let's say it was the one where the young actresses said yes to a pool party and didn't know. Or no, let's say it was the one where the rugby team covered up the girl's death and the school covered for the rugby team. No, it was the one where the harasser ended up on the Supreme Court. It was the one where the rapist ended up on the Supreme Court. It was the one where the woman, shaking, testified all day on live TV and nothing happened. And so some of that I definitely recognise as real. I assume all of them are taken from real headlines. And that comes up several times throughout the book, these repetitive passages where she just fills you with rage about the injustices that go on. It's also quite self-aware because the book definitely is appealing to fans of true crime podcasts, but it is also exposing and exploring the inherent exploitative nature of those true crime podcasts and whether they are just committing another form of harm against the usually women, because it is usually women who are the victims of violent crimes like this, if it's just doing more harm to the victim or the victim's family if the victim didn't survive. So there's a lot to think about. It was a really good book. I really recommend it. But it's not out till February, sorry. The last piece of jewelry I'm going to show you is this beautiful necklace. I have already got almost an identical necklace from Ana Luisa in red, so a gold chain with a red heart, but I had to get it again, a silver chain with a green heart, because green is my favourite colour. This one gives me Heart of the Ocean vibes as well, which is a massive Titanic nerd, is definitely a plus. I think it's gorgeous. This is the Hannah Lee necklace in green, and you can get this one for £79 full price, or once again, if you use my link in the description box, you will get it for a cheaper price. Okay, we're nearly there, a few more to go. The next thing I did was haul a book on my Kindle called Monsters by Emerald Fennel, and I read it. And this book was not quite what I wanted it to be honest. I was intrigued by it. So I know of Emerald Fennel as the writer and director of Promising Young Woman, the movie, which was incredible, and she also was a co-writer, I think, for Cinderella, the Andrew Lloyd Webber production, which I really, really enjoyed. So I knew her as someone who is feminist and quite dark in her writing, so I was very intrigued by the premise of her having written a book about two scary children. And I'll say from the beginning, I was confused as to whether or not this book is a young adult book. It is not totally clear. Even having read it, I'm still unclear. The book is set in this seaside town. It's about a girl who is sent every summer there to spend the summer with her aunt and uncle who run a hotel there. She is quite a sad, neglected little girl, so we learn right from the beginning that her parents are dead. They were squished or smushed, something like the word that she uses, in a boating accident, and it becomes quite clear this is a girl who takes quite a lot of glee in death. She was not and never has been particularly sad about her parents dying. She was sent off to live with her grandmother, who she lives with most of the year, except for every summer when her grandmother packs her off to stay with her aunt and uncle. This summer, while she's there, bodies keep washing up on the shore, dead bodies of women, and so our main character is fascinated by this, and with the help of another little boy who is a guest at the hotel, by little boy, I think they're 13, something like that, so a young teenager, with the help of Miles, she sets off to try and solve this mystery. Where I think the book went wrong for me is I'm not sure that Emerald Fennel had quite figured out her tone, or, like I said, who she was aiming at. So the book reads like a Roald Dahl novel, in that you get these kind of joyfully horrid little children, and they are being neglected and mistreated by terrible adults, and all of that in Roald Dahl manages to be quite funny. But what happened in this book is Emerald Fennel brings in a bit too much reality. So it's not just that she's got this caricature of an uncle who is a sort of mistrustful figure of abuse. He is actually, it is quite obviously implied he is sexually abusing her, and suddenly the laughter stops there. And I found that to be a continuous problem throughout this book. Is it was written as if it was a sort of Roald Dahl dark children's book, but it was just a bit too real that I wanted to take a step back and to talk about these issues more seriously, I guess. And I'm not saying that you can't approach really dark issues with a sense of humour, some dark humour, or with some lightness, or that you can't make them accessible for children to read and understand. I just, in this particular execution of it, it didn't quite work for me. I read the book Next of Kin by Sue Welfare, which has been on my TBR for about a year now. I'm so slow at getting to things. My colleague Andy sent me this about a year ago, and I finally read it, and again, I have already reviewed this book in a video on reading the least popular books on my TBR. So I talked earlier about Adele, which was the lowest rated book on my TBR. this was just the least reviewed. It had the lowest number of reviews. Those reviews were quite high, it's just that there weren't many of them. I think there were 4 on Storygraph. It's a story about a woman who lives with her brother and the two of them being scammed by a con artist who comes to live with them, and their situation gets very, very quickly worse and worse and worse and seemingly impossible to get out of. So it's a page turner, but as you'll see, I said in that video, I didn't really believe any of it. I didn't particularly believe the characters, I didn't believe the decisions that they would make, and I found there were a lot of plot holes in the story. So I didn't end up particularly liking this book. I was really interested to find out that Sue Welfare actually is a best-selling author, but not for thrillers. She usually writes romances. So this was her trying something different, which is cool. And finally, the final book I have to talk about you in this video, I feel like I've been talking for 300 hours, is Everything's Fine by Cecelia Rabess. This is a book that I hauled this month. I brought it home from the office and I instantly read it. And this book is incredible. And I'm giving you a sneak preview because this does not come out until June next year. Full disclosure, this is a book that I am working on at work. We publish it from Pam Macmillan, but I just think it's incredible. Our main character in this book is Jess, and we follow her as she graduates from uni and gets her first job working in finance, where she is the only black girl in the room, often the only woman in the room. She is surrounded by preppy white conservative men, including Josh, who is a guy who she actually already knew. They were at uni together and they clashed on a lot of their beliefs. Now, I was wary going into this one that it was going to be a case of black liberal woman meets white conservative man and they find a middle where they're different, where they can meet in the middle of their differences, and I was slightly wary of that. It's not that. It's so much more complicated and amazing than that. Jess and Josh do fall in love, and I didn't think I would ever believe that, but I did believe it. When we re-meet Josh at work, he does seem like he has changed from the complete arsehole guy that we met at uni. He regrets a lot of the things that he said. He is still conservative politically, but Jess herself is confused about what she thinks. She's definitely liberal, but she is working in this finance job. She is determined to make money, to have a financially secure future. We get to learn a lot about the nuances of her struggle to live in line with her convictions, I guess. And so you do understand how she can bond with Josh, especially as increasingly Josh hugely admires Jess and thinks the world of her, and you really start to see how this pair have this incredible, complicated connection. But this book is set in 2016. It is set in the build-up to the 2016 election, and in that context, it becomes clear that everything is not fine. There's so much to love about this book. I think this book is going to be huge. You heard it here first. I think everyone is going to be talking about this because it's got so many components. It's an incredible love story, and you really do, trust me, you really do become invested in this love story. As much as you might hate the idea of Jess dating somebody like Josh, who sucks in so many ways, you do become invested in this love story. You do see some of the good in Josh. Jess herself is the best character. She is really the linchpin of this story, and being inside her head, such an interesting place to explore. It made me think a lot about the nuances of my own life and the ways that I don't live in line with the things that I believe in every way. And so how it does become easy for her to make these exceptions for people who don't think the same way as her, because she starts to feel, what leg do I have to stand on? I just think it's one of the most interesting books that I've read, and I cannot wait for this book to come out and everyone to be talking about it. So, with that, oh my goodness, that was a long time filming. That means that my books are back. I hauled 8 books, I read 8 books. Actually, I read 9 books, but one of them was Luckiest Girl Alive, so it didn't count. Once again, don't forget to click the link in my description box below so you can go through and browse the Ana Luisa website, get your hands on gorgeous jewellery pieces like this, especially this snake, and of course please do subscribe to this channel because I post new videos every week and you don't want to miss them. See you next time.
Nothing like your smile in the morning, following the linings on your cheek.